Why do some people talk about homeschooling and others talk about home education? Is there even a difference? What is that difference? Hi, I'm Adam, brain-based dad. I'm a home educating dad who was also home educated. And if you're confused about the difference between homeschooling and home education, I'm not surprised. The two terms are often used interchangeably, but there are some significant differences. I'm going to explain the two major differences between homeschooling and home education, show you how and when they fit together and when they don't. I'm going to clarify where unschooling fits in, and if it makes a difference, which you choose to do and how it changes your brain. Now, if you notice, I said I'm a home educating dad who was also home educated. And I say that very intentionally. I wasn't homeschooled and I don't homeschool my kids. I actually unschool my kids and I was unschooled myself. And I'll talk a bit more about unschooling later on. There are two main reasons I say I home educate. The first is pretty simple and straightforward, but the second actually changes how you think about what you do. It changes what you do day to day, and it does it in a really surprising way without you even noticing it. Now, if you get value from this video, please hit the like button below and make sure you subscribe to see future videos about learning, home education, and the brain. Now, it's worth noting that there's no official distinction between home education and homeschooling. There's no governing body internationally to decide on exact definitions. In fact, a lot of the people that I work with use home education and homeschooling interchangeably and even think of them as the same thing. But I'm curious, what do you use? Do you use homeschooling or home education? Have you ever thought about why? Leave a comment down below. The first and simplest difference between home education and homeschooling is geography. Where you are in the world will determine whether you typically say homeschooling or home education. You know, here in the UK and in most of the Commonwealth countries, the term that's mostly used is home education. In the US and in Canada, the term that's mostly used is homeschooling, but you'll still hear people talk about home education as well. Now, this geographic difference may be, at least in part, due to a differing legal or legislative background. For example, here in the UK, the Department for Education uses terminology such as elective home education, which is, I expect, at least in part why people here in the UK talk about home education rather than homeschooling, because it matches up with what the government here are talking about. Now, this could be a chicken and egg situation. Did the government use the term and the phrase home education because it was more used here, or do people use it here because the government started talking about home education rather than homeschooling? I don't know. Now, if it was just a geographic difference, and the two terms were completely interchangeable, it wouldn't really make a difference which you used. You just used the phrase that was more common. But although they're often used interchangeably, they're not actually interchangeable terms. There's a subtle but profound difference between the two terms that actually changes how your brain processes that information and alters what you do with your kids. But to understand that difference, you've actually got to understand the full spectrum of home education. Think of it like this. Home education's the umbrella term that's used to capture all learning that happens outside of a traditional school setting. And that includes homeschooling, mentoring, unschooling, self-directed learning. So home education is actually a huge spectrum of all learning that can be done at home. At one end of the spectrum is a highly structured formal education program that's provided at home with curricula, lessons, timetables, break times even, etc., etc. It recreates school at home, or homeschooling. At the other end of the spectrum is unschooling. Unschooling is a term first coined by the late John Holt to mean learning and teaching that does not resemble school learning and teaching. It's generally considered to be informal, child-led and unstructured, although that may not always be the case. Patrick Ferenga, who worked with John Holt for many years, said, "I broadly define unschooling as allowing your children as much freedom to explore the world around them in their own ways as you can comfortably bear." Let me know in the comments below if you'd like me to make a video about unschooling or any other aspect of home education. Now, unschooling isn't a perfect term, and even John Holt, who coined the phrase, ended up using unschooling and homeschooling interchangeably, which may be why there's some confusion between those two terms, even within the home ed community. So at one end of the spectrum, you have homeschooling, and at the other end of the spectrum, you have unschooling or radical unschooling. Now, wherever you sit on that spectrum, you're a home educator. I find that most people I work with sit somewhere in the middle. Now that you understand the difference between the terms home education and homeschooling, the question is, does it even make any difference? Obviously, looking at the home ed spectrum, everybody is a home educator, wherever you sit on that spectrum. But it's going to make quite a big difference whether you're an unschooler or a homeschooler. You know, homeschooling is much more prescriptive and parent-led. Now, that can be useful for parents because parents often want to know that their kids are progressing, so they want to have their children be learning and studying rather than learning. But it can also be quite stressful for children. For all intents and purposes, it's school, but at home. And school can be stressful for kids. I've done a video about that before, you can check that out. And it's often more for the parents' benefit than for the kids, because parents get worried that their kids aren't progressing or that they're behind school kids or behind the national average or whatever it is. Unschooling, on the other hand, which is child-led, means that kids may not be interested in reading or maths for a really long time. In fact, typically, kids get interested in reading between the ages of about 8 and 12, and they do it in their own time. Now, if a child gets to 11 years old and they can't read, parents often start to worry that their child is behind, that they're not going to learn how to read of their own accord. So it's often for the parents' benefit that they start to push a curricula or push lessons or push more structure than the child really needs. Unschooling actually requires quite a lot of trust from the parents to allow their children to get to reading or maths or anything else in their own time, in their own way. So while everyone's a home educator, there's a much bigger practical and philosophical difference between homeschooling and unschooling than there really is between homeschooling and home education. But here's the big question. Does it make any difference which we say? Does it make a difference whether I say I'm a home educator or I say I'm a homeschooler? For that, we need to turn to Lera Boroditsky. Lera Boroditsky is a cognitive scientist whose main interest is in how language affects the way we think. She says, "Do the languages we speak shape the way we see the world, the way we think, and the way we live our lives? What we have learned is that people who speak different languages do indeed think differently, and that even flukes of grammar can profoundly affect how we see the world. Studies have shown that changing how people talk changes how they think. Teaching people new colour words, for instance, changes their ability to discriminate colours. Linguistic processes are pervasive in most fundamental domains of thought, unconsciously shaping us from the nuts and bolts of cognition and perception to our loftiest abstract notions and major life decisions. Language is central to our experience of being human, and the languages we speak profoundly shape the way we think, the way we see the world, and the way we live our lives." What that means is the words that we use changes how our brain processes that information and alters the way the world occurs for us. Different words trigger different patterns of thought and different patterns of action. So it actually makes a difference whether we say we home educate or we homeschool, because it alters how we think about what we do. If you say you're a home educator, you have access to the full spectrum of home education, from homeschooling to unschooling, and you can find what works best for your family. If you consider yourself to be a homeschooler, whether you realize it or not, you're going to be shaped by that word, and you're going to be subconsciously nudged in that direction of recreating school at home. Is that bad? Only if you don't want to be subconsciously nudged in that direction. You know, I'm an unschooler and I don't want to be nudged in that direction. I don't want to recreate school at home. School is inherently stressful. And if I recreate school at home, well, now instead of school being the source of that stress for kids, our home life is the source of stress for my kids. And I don't want that. You know, the best thing that you can do to promote learning and growth and development is to keep stress low. I know that when I get stressed, I'm much more likely to yell. You know, it happens to us all. But I know that when I yell, the only thing that they're learning at that point is how to survive a stressful situation. So keeping stress low is the best thing that you can do. If that's something that you want help with, I'll put a link to my free breathing program down below, and you're probably going to want to check out this video for a surprising way to reduce stress.